Hey guys, what's up? Dingo Crikey here with another commentary video. This time I'm going to be doing a Takara versus Hasbro video. This one's topic, Hasbro's Robots in Disguise toy line versus its Takara counterpart, Transformers Adventure. So it's time for another Takara vs. Hasbro comparison video. Now that the Adventure line has been around for some time and has had time to catch up to the Robots in Disguise line for the most part, I figured that it would be appropriate to do one of these videos. So for anyone who hasn't seen my previous videos like this, basically I'll have an image on the screen showing a side-by-side comparison between a Robots in Disguise figure along with their Transformers Adventure counterpart and discuss them on a number of different levels to see which one looks to be the better figure. Now, I'm not super strict with the grading system. I'm not going to give each figure like a point or something like that, but overall I'm looking at kind of like overall look, the paint placement, how much colors did they use, does it look good, show accuracy, all those things. And one thing that's very important to understand is this is a primarily opinion-based video. And what I mean by that is, yeah, of course, things such as show accuracy and the number of paint applications are, pretty easy to kind of detail and see, what is actually fact. So there is an objective part of the analysis, but overall, I am just kind of sharing my opinion on these. Which do I think looks to be the better figure? And I'm not like an expert on color schemes or toy design, so if I say I prefer one over the other, I'm not saying that's necessarily the right opinion to have. It's just a personal opinion as someone who's been a long time consumer of Transformers action figures. Another important note, these lines do not match up perfectly, meaning we don't necessarily have a direct counterpart for every figure, i.e. there are some characters that don't simply have a different color version in the other line. Also, some of the repaint themes are completely different, so in these cases I will just be comparing their closest counterparts and seeing which is the better figure. Sometimes they're really different, so it's kind of hard to, analyze them, but of course it's still fun, and when show accuracy comes into play, the different size classes will definitely be a little bit more relevant in comparison. Speaking of classes, with a few exceptions, I will be primarily looking at the Warrior class figures, aka the main line. And I should mention that neither lines are complete as of this recording, so there may be some figures that are left out of this, such as Thunderhoof, because at this point in time they do not have a Transformers Adventure counterpart revealed. And in the future, if you guys want to see an updated Robots in Disguise versus Adventure comparison, I may do that, but I think this is going to be the bulk of the line, so I'm probably just going to stick with this video, unless people really do want to see an updated comparison. And of course, if you are interested in more comparisons such as this one, you can go to my channel and my playlist to check out my other Takara vs. Hasbro videos. You guys can also drop off recommendations for future Takara vs. Hasbro videos. Anyways, if you survived the massive introduction, let's get to looking at the comparison between these figures. And fittingly, we begin with Warrior class Bumblebee. And we have the RID version to the left and the Adventure version to the right, which will be pretty much the format for all of these. So right off the bat, it would be a little bit hard to spot the differences between these two guys. They actually look quite similar. The biggest difference that is probably going to jump out is that the Takara version generally has darker shades of the colors, primarily the yellow. While some of that may have to do with the lighting in this image, I do believe the Takara one does have a little bit of a darker shade. Either way, I don't think the shade of yellow in this scenario is really a deal breaker or maker. It kind of looks good on either figure, though I could definitely see why some people would prefer the Adventure version. Nevertheless, I think the key area areas for comparisons are going to be in the paint applications, and though they are few, they are definitely present. Basically, the adventure version has the same paint placements as the Hasbro version does, except with the addition of a few extra paint applications, namely the red taillights and headlights on the car, the blue paint on the wheels, and some details on the car doors. And while these are minimal differences, I think they're really important in this figure considering it's a pretty bland and basic mold overall. Neither one is particularly exciting looking, but the Takara one does have the edge when it comes to additional details. Now another difference they have is with the symbol on the chest, and in this case I think the Hasbro version kind of has the edge because it doesn't have the goofy rainbow paint. Now one more area of comparison, we're going to be looking at both in comparison to their show counterpart, and really none do a great job at getting him down perfectly. You know, usually we have the Hasbro version, and that definitely has its flaws, some mispainted parts, and then the Takara version corrects a lot of those. Not always, but a lot of times that's the case. This definitely wasn't the case for Bumblebee. Granted, the Takara version may have a slight edge on accuracy, it's still missing a lot of the paint details that would make him look more like his show counterpart, namely in the legs, in the waist, then also on the chest he's still missing the blue paint, you know, those little tidbits there. So neither are really show accurate. However, the Adventure one does give a slightly better representation, and I think as a figure it looks better. So as for Bumblebee, the Adventure one definitely has the upper hand. Next, we have a whole bunch of Bumblebee repaints. Now, up to current date, there's only been one Takara repaint of this mold, at least that I know of, and several RID versions, so I'm just going to be kind of, you know, comparing this one Takara version to the several Hasbro versions. And these two here are probably the most appropriate for comparison, as they look like they're trying to get across the same theme, with having Bumblebee's traditional color scheme, but adding more silver and all-spark blue in there. And with this in mind, I think the Takara version definitely has a nicer overall look. I mean, for one, it's way more unique looking, especially in comparison to the original figure, whereas the Hasbro version, I mean, they did switch up a lot of the paint applications, but at a glance it looks kind of like we have Warrior Class Bumblebee with all spark power, and it still has a strong resemblance to the original figure. I prefer what the Takara figure does here. He almost looks like a completely different character here. I believe they even remolded the head, which was a really nice touch. But other than that, he has a lot of blue in there, which the Hasbro version has as well, but in the case of the Adventure version, the blue is primarily translucent, which definitely gives him a lot of character in comparison. While the Robots in Disguise one isn't terrible in regards to paint applications, the Adventure one definitely has a lot more of them, especially in the legs. There's just, you know, a lot of different stuff going on there, and it looks pretty cool. Now, I will say the Adventure one can look a little overbearing in some places. Nevertheless, it is a lot more interesting looking than the Robots in Disguise version, and when you're looking at repaints, that's definitely a big plus, especially considering the Robots in Disguise one doesn't look all that different from the original Warrior Class figure, so this one definitely goes to the Takara figure. And yeah, I should mention he has the additional weapon, the staff. I think that's his Decepticon Hunter. Either way, it's definitely cool to see. Moving on to the next comparison, we have Night Ops Bumblebee against the same Takara figure, since I don't believe Japan has a version of Night Ops Bumblebee. Now, I think this comparison is definitely closer. This Robots in Disguise Bumblebee is much more interesting than the previous one at a glance, namely because the color scheme is so different. Even though it is kind of just the opposite of the Warrior Class Bumblebee, it's definitely kind of striking. Still, how does it stand up against this Adventure figure? I mean, the Adventure one as a repaint is still a much more unique repaint, so it definitely has that going for it. Whereas mentioned, this Night Ops Bumblebee is pretty much just like a reverse Bumblebee. Also, this RID version doesn't really do a whole lot to up the amount of paint applications. I still think the Takara version's better. This RID Night Ops Bumblebee isn't necessarily bad, and yeah, they are hard to compare, but since we are comparing, the Takara one definitely wins here. Then we have one more comparison. This is probably the most similar to the original Warrior class figure out of the bunch. However, despite it being so similar, I do think this one has some interesting tidbits that might make it look better than the original Warrior class figure. The black sword is really nice looking here, though I'm sure it is kind of amped up being that this is a 3D render and not the actual figure. The light blue also looks kind of cool. He has some neat details on the chest that give him some more character. His upper arms are very yellow. He doesn't have any black paint up there. I don't think it necessarily looks too bad, you know. Some black up there might have helped to kind of balance out the color scheme, but overall, you know, they do a pretty good job at that. He has that light blue in all different places. The black and the yellow, they're all kind of spread out. So that's pretty nice. I think the color scheme on this one does look nice overall. Definitely a little less congested than this Adventure Bumblebee. Nevertheless, I think the Adventure one still has the win here because it's more interesting looking. So different in comparison to the original Warrior class Bumblebee and has a lot of character. So despite Hasbro's 3 attempts at a Bumblebee repaint, Takara wins with just one, looking like a very unique, nice figure. Moving on to the next character, we have Warrior class Drift. Now, one thing that stands out right off the bat is that the main color in the figures, in this case it is orange, is a lighter shade. Anyways, I definitely don't think that the shade of orange is the determining factor here, so let's look at some other features these two guys have. At a glance, they may look pretty similar, but in more detailed analysis, you'll realize that they are quite different, mainly in regards to paint application and placement. The Takara version, he has the tidbits of blue on the chest, then also on the knees, those tidbits of red. His shoulders are lined with the black. Going off of that, I think it's the main difference between these two figures. The Takara one just has much more paint application. We even see it in the face. The Takara version gives him his whole mustache detail, which is definitely pretty significant. He also has some additional paint even on the feet, which definitely looks pretty nice. Now, they both have some red streaks on their arms. That's just kind of a different use of the paint, which, could go either way for you. Some people may like the overall look of the Robots in Disguise version better. He doesn't have all the red and the blue thrown throughout, so they might feel it looks a little bit more consistent. But I think all of the paint applications that the Takara version has really do a lot to complement and complete the look of the figure. I mean, it's not like he really has anything to throw off the color scheme. The blue contrasts nicely against the orange. The red is a nice complement to the orange as well. And, black's kind of a color you can use anywhere, so I don't really see any problems with the additional colors they gave him. Now, of course, one of the main points for comparison is how both look in regards to their show counterpart, and both definitely have some flaws here. Namely, they're caused because of, just the design differences. I mean, especially the arms here are pretty different from what they look like in the show. Still, Takara's version does have those additional details that he has in the show, which the RID version is lacking. Let's look at a few. Let's look at the show image. You can see around his head he has those little red details, which are painted that same color on the Adventure version. On the Robots in Disguise one, they are just left black. The chest on both of them looks pretty close to the show. However, the Adventure version also has those blue details. Now, the waist is not accurate on either of these. Neither have the red detailing. But looking at the skirt thing he has, the Takara version has way more paint there, which is closer in resemblance to the show. And from what we can see of the legs here, the Takara version gives those extra paint applications. So neither version is perfect, but I think the Adventure version hits it way closer to home. And I think overall it is just a better, more complete looking figure and more show accurate. So next we move on to the Drift repaints, which, as you can see, are completely different, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on them. The adventure version is motif to his IDW comic book counterpart, and the Robots in Disguise version has one of these blue toned down stealth themes. Initially, I look at the stealth theme, and while I do really like the looks of this figure, I think the color scheme looks great, it definitely is lacking in some paint applications. But the Takara version doesn't do a whole lot better. For being such a prominent character, this IDW version of Drift, he does have paint applications, but not nearly as many as the typical warrior class figure in the adventure line. While the vehicle mode looks great, I can't help but seeing the robot mode as a little bit awkward look. Maybe it's just that he simply has way too much white on the entire leg area. I do like the homage, and I think it's nice that they gave him a resculpted head, but it looks a little bit off. In comparison, the Arctic camo doesn't have a whole lot wrong with it, but it isn't like incredibly unique or striking at the same time. So I'm going to kind of say this is a draw between these two. Like I said, they're kind of hard to compare, but I think both pros and cons kind of put it on the same level. Next, we move on to one of the oddballs, and that is Fixit. Now, don't be deceived with the overabundance of orange in both of them, because there are some considerable differences here. Namely, the Takara version has an overall darker color scheme added by, I think that's like a really dark bronzish color. Maybe it's black and it just looks that way in these images, but either way, he definitely has an overall darker look, darker colors, and I feel it blends its colors together a little bit more nicely, using that kind of caramel color to put on the trims of some areas, whereas the Hasbro version has a lot of gray in the paint applications that it does have, which they're pretty equal on the way they use the paint. The Takara version does have a slight edge in that area. I don't think there's much more to compare about these two in themselves, so I'm going to move on to where it gets interesting, and that's comparing them to their show counterpart. And I think what is really interesting here is that neither really achieve pure show accuracy. I mean, the Takara one has the flaws of getting the color scheme off, using darker colors where there should just kind of be a gray, and it uses a very light bluish silver in areas that are just supposed to be sort of an all-spark blue. However, the RID version may have a more accurate color scheme in name, but it is missing many paint applications that would give it a lot more character and resemblance to its show counterpart. But when it comes to show accuracy, I do think that the Robots in Disguise version does a better job at just capturing the essence of his show counterpart. However, as a figure itself, I think I prefer the adventure version, just because it has those additional colors, and I think they kind of flow together better. However, because of the show accuracy issue, I could definitely see some people preferring the Robots in Disguise version in this case. Next, we move on to Warrior Class Fracture. Now, at a glance, these guys look almost identical, and even at a closer look, they still kind of look identical. Never fear though, there are some differences to speak of, as we have some differences in paint on the feet, and on the shoulders they're actually colored quite differently, but I think the main difference here is that the Robots in Disguise version actually uses some more diverse shades of purple, namely a lighter purple along with a darker purple that is especially present on the lower legs and throughout the body, whereas the adventure version sticks to pretty much one tone of purple, outside of some of those spikes on the shoulders being colored a much darker color. We can also see on the vehicle mode, the sides of the motorcycle have more silver paint on them in the adventure version, which would be on the lower arm in robot mode, where the Robots in Disguise version just simply doesn't have it. However, it kind of makes up for it with some of the other details, such as the back of the motorcycle having those silver spikes, which helps to give some more contrast. So, looking at them in comparison to their show counterpart, we have some of the problems which we had with Fixit. In some areas, the RID one looks more accurate, sort of because it has those darker colors throughout the body, and in the show he's primarily a darker purple than either figure has on their entire body. Whereas, in regards to the shoulder, the adventure version definitely looks like it tried to be more accurate. So, It kind of depends on what we're looking at here. In my personal opinion, I think the Robots in Disguise one looks more accurate because of that darker purple that is used throughout. And I think that, along with the shoulder details, sell it as being the better looking figure. The Adventure one is not far behind, but the RID one has a little bit of an edge here just because it has some more diversity throughout. So we are going to move on to Warrior Class Grimlock. And I believe these guys, as far as paint placement, are pretty much exactly the same. It's pretty much the tone of green that sets them apart. And basically what we have is the RID one having a little bit more of a toned down green, whereas the Adventure one having more of a loud color. So I'm going to move right on to the show comparison, in which neither really nail it. The Robots in Disguise version does not have the same color placement as the show version does. If you want specific examples, look at the waist, look at the lower arms, and the lower legs. In short, they're just more bland looking, and the Adventure version didn't really do much to correct this. So really, when picking out the better one, all we have to go off of is the shade of green. For me personally, I like the Adventure version. I could see people preferring the RID version, but really, there's not much of a difference here. However, we have another comparison for Hasbro's Warrior Class Grimlock, because Takara released another Grimlock to the main Adventure line under the name of Battle Grimlock, and basically this is a repaint and remold of Fall of Cybertron Grimlock. And here we have differences galore, being that not only they are different molds, but the Fall of Cybertron mold is a bigger mold. The Battle Grimlock does a much better job at giving off a big, strong appearance, whereas the Warrior Grimlock just kind of has a tiny look to it. For me, a problem with a lot of figures, which is something we have seen all throughout Transformers history, is where you have a character that should be big and they're just shrunk down, because for whatever reason, once they're shrunk down, they look even smaller than characters who are their size but are skinny, and Warrior Class Grimlock definitely suffers from this. However, this Takara version really pulls off a better look, a big, tough, strong, all those things you would want in Grimlock, especially for his character in this show. As far as paint placement, they are similar, but altogether though, he just has way more paint applications. We can see it on his upper and lower legs, in the torso, in the arms, the neck, just about everywhere. Even in the dinosaur modes, he just has more colors. Let's also look at the T-Rex modes. Now, the RID version, it does what it's supposed to, but it does still look kind of dinky and awkward. The Adventure version is more like a traditional T-Rex, but it looks ferocious, has a large look to it, and it still captures that look of his character in Robots in Disguise. So I think it's probably better in this mode as well. Looking at them compared to the show version, it's surprising to say, because the Adventure version in this case is just a repaint and a remold, but I think it actually looks more like the character than a mold that was made specifically for this design. From the arms, the paint they used in the arms, all those little yellow rectangle shaped things, the body paint, all the little yellow details throughout, they just really nailed the color scheme and did the proper remolding that he would look appropriate for this character. The legs do look kind of off, the colors definitely are spot on, but it's not like the original Warrior Class figure did a good job at representing the color scheme either. So as far as accuracy and overall look, this Battle Grimlock definitely wins in comparison to Warrior Class Grimlock from the RID line and from the Adventure line. Anyways, let's move on to the next figure. In short, the Adventure version of Jazz really just has every color that the RID version has, and more. Now, there are some colors that are definitely swapped out, such as on the knees and the legs, but if you were to look at the chest area and upper torso, you have some color swapped out there, but you really just have the adventure version basically just having more detail, such as the little blue stripes back near the head. Then on the head itself, we, have a similar color scheme, but they just really give him more outlines of blue. Same thing on the shoulder. Both have the red there, but the Takara version gives him an extra stripe there. And if you look at the vehicle mode, the differences just become more stunning. When compared to their show counterpart, they definitely both have some problems. I mean, for one, the translation from show to toy for this guy really didn't turn out that well, so they both are going to have some initial problems just because of that. But, each version gets some things right and some things wrong. At the base of the chest area, which is, kind of like the front of the car, the RID version gives him that red stripe, which the Takara version pretty much forgets. But then the Takara version has that little detail of blue underneath the neck, which the RID version doesn't have. But overall, I think the additional paint applications that the adventure version has just makes it look more show accurate. It doesn't get everything right, but it probably gets more things right than the RID version, and not only helps him look more show accurate, but just gives him a nicer look as a figure. Next, we have Megatronus. I think if you were to take an overall look of these guys, the main thing you're probably going to notice is that the adventure version has a lot more little details painted all throughout, whereas the RID version, takes some big pieces and gives them color, where it kind of doesn't spend as much time on little nitty-gritty details. I think you can really see this in the chest. The RID version does have that big piece of purple down the center, but the adventure version has little bits of purple painted all throughout, whereas the center's left, kind of gray with just little bits, and then that big rainbow Decepticon symbol there. I mean, some other things, we have the arms basically painted totally different, though they use pretty much the same colors. But really, wherever you look on the figure, I think the one thing that is going to stand out, as it does in most of these comparisons, is that the Takara version just has more small details added all throughout. However, in this case, I don't think the RID version's lack of a bunch of nitty-gritty details is necessarily a bad thing, because it still has a good amount of paint application. I think in some cases it actually makes better use of the colors. Looking at purple in particular, already the paint details on the RID version being bigger may kind of help because he's a blockier figure, so it, kind of could fit that look. However, when we compare it to the show counterpart, I don't think there's any denying that the Takara one does get a closer representation to the show color scheme. Basically, it's the details that sell it. He has a fair amount of little detailed colored spaces in the show, and, they represented this more accurately on the adventure version, whereas the Robots in Disguise version just leaves a lot of those out. Next, we have the comparison between the two main Optimus figures for both lines. In the Robots in Disguise version, we of course have Warrior Class Optimus, and this other version of Optimus not everyone may be familiar with, so I'll try to clear this up. Basically, from what I know, the adventure version of the line did not release a Warrior Class Optimus Prime figure, and this is sort of their main Optimus, sort of like what they had with Battle Grimlock being a repaint of Fall of Cybertron Grimlock, except I believe this is a new mold, and this is sort of like a Supreme Class. This thing's pretty big if you look at images of it, and it's basically their representation of Optimus from RID. So in this kind of comparison, a lot of it is going to come down to, comparing them to their show counterparts, but we could try to look at the figures on their individual merits. In which case, in the sense of an overall look, the Warrior version, here we have a character who is supposed to be large in appearance, have kind of a massive look to him, and he really looks like he was shrunk down and kind of has a dinky look to him. Even if you're going to take his massive size aside and just look at the figure itself, it looks really crammed, and we have all of that kibble sticking out, which, kind of obscures what might have been in a better design. The adventure version does not suffer from those problems of kibble, at least at initial glance. You can kind of see in the back there he might have some, but as far as the arms, the body, the legs do have a little bit of kibble. I'd also say the adventure version has a big presence to him. The way the chest is designed, the broad shoulders, and the long legs really do a nice job at, giving him that presence. He also has a more thorough distribution of colors, having tons of little details all throughout, especially in the chest, whereas the RID version definitely is lacking. Vehicle modes as well. The adventure version just looks as though it gets across the theme much better, whereas the RID version clearly looks like a robot that turned into this truck, especially with the legs and the feet sticking up. The adventure version doesn't have those problems. Now, that's not to say it's a perfect looking figure. I mean, it's a very large, hollow looking figure, which is something a lot of us have really come to dislike. Just how hollow Transformers are, and it's definitely more noticeable when they're this large. And looking at their show comparison, there's no doubt about it, the adventure version looks way more accurate to his show counterpart pretty much in every way. I mean, I don't even think I really have to go into detail here. It's just, so evident. Outside of maybe the huge hollow legs, the adventure version is basically what we should have gotten for Robots in Disguise Optimus. Instead, we got the Warrior version, which isn't particularly a bad figure, but it doesn't do nearly as good of a job at fulfilling its purpose. Next, we have Warrior Class Sideswipe. Now, this guy has a bunch of little differences. When I take a look at RID Sideswipe, I see a figure with a lot of red and black. Looking at Adventure's version, you get a ton more detail going on with this guy at pretty much every inch of him. In the chest, the only main differences are having those two little rectangles close to the shoulders, painted blue in the Adventure version, and an Autobot symbol below all of that. I guess it's Cybertronian writing on the chest. The waist area looks much more finished as well, with a big array of different paint applications. The legs are pretty similar in appearance. You do have that difference of paint on the knees. And then on the feet, we have the Takara one giving him red bottoms and leaving out those little blue specks, which the RID one does have, which is kind of curious that the RID one has those details. There are a few other minor details that are obvious in robot mode. You can kind of see some of that back kibble has some additional blue paint, and on his arms he has a black line going through, what's going to be the car, and on his shoulders they give him blue paint in the wheels, so altogether he just has much more paint application, which makes the vehicle modes kind of a curious sight, considering in this case the adventure one is just, a lot of red, whereas the RID one has black spread basically all throughout. I know for a lot of people the adventure version of Sideswipe is a dead win over the RID version. I could kind of see people going either way with him. Personally, it comes down to the mode for me. In robot mode, I like the adventure version much better. I could agree the body looks a little bit congested, but overall I think the extra details are worth it. The RID version is a kind of cool figure, but it definitely is lacking. In car mode though, the RID version is a clear win. I do like the blue in the tires on the adventure version, but overall the RID version just looks nicer. Adventure one is a little bit too bland. When it comes to show accuracy, once again we kind of have a poor translation when it comes to overall design, so that's going to set up a number of problems. But overall the adventure one does a much better job at looking like his show counterpart. As I've mentioned several times, it's really the chest details that sell it, though neither one is perfect by any standard. The adventure one does a better job. Even the knee detail is, more accurate. The only thing really is the RID gets the feet better, but overall I think the adventure one does a better job, and that considered along with the fact that for me robot modes are usually more important than the vehicle modes, I'm going to go with the adventure one in this case. Next we have Warrior Class Steeljaw, and for this guy there really aren't as many little differences to talk about. Really, it's just all about the color shades, namely the shade of blue. The RID has a very candy, bright blue, whereas the adventure version has a very pale, toned down shade of the color. Also, when looking at them compared to their show counterpart, it's pretty clear that neither really nail the look, but Adventure Steeljaw definitely is closer when it comes to show accuracy. Still, they are missing a ton of paint applications that he has in the show. I mean, all those little red details, even some of the gray ones. Neither look really great in my opinion, but overall I do think the Adventure one wins. And lastly, we finish off with Strongarm, and primarily this is a battle of shades, but there are a few detail differences to speak of. Namely in the upper body, we see the RID version just kind of having a plain look in the chest and the head without giving too much detail, just, a lot of blue, whereas the Adventure version does make more detailed designs in both of those areas. The Adventure figure's vehicle mode also carries on that striped look, as we can see in the front of the car and even on the car doors, whereas RID's version is much more basic looking. But outside of these detail differences, obviously the main difference is the tone of the blue. The Adventure version has a darker blue, more of your traditional blue color, whereas the RID version has basically, a more toned down version of that color. And neither look particularly bad. Considering the other colors are just white and black, it kind of looks fine either way. The Adventure version is definitely more eye-catching and not overbearing enough to be ugly, but maybe some people prefer the more toned-down look of the RID version, as the colors kind of blend together a little bit better. So ultimately I think this is going to kind of come down to show accuracy, and when you look at that, the colors of the RID version are definitely more spot on. We do have another one of these cases where there are a lot of differences. For instance, the shoulders are, neither version have them right here. The show has like a really kind of odd dark bluish green color, and the RID or the Adventure clearly don't even attempt for that. Also, the waist is totally different. It's pretty much bland on the RID and Adventure version. Same with the legs. So neither one really made heavy attempts, especially it's disappointing for the Adventure version, considering, they already had the RID one around and they really didn't make any improvements. However, the Adventure one's color tones are probably more accurate overall, and it does have those chest and head details, so it definitely is more show accurate, and I think those details are the saving grace in that area, and also in making it look like the better figure. Otherwise, I would probably say they could, pretty much be on an equal level, but those extra details obviously do go a far way. And that sums up my commentary on all of these comparisons, and it went on way longer than I originally planned, so I'm going to make this outro as quick as I possibly can. In the past, there have been, I would say, fair grounds for arguing for, either side, Takara or Hasbro in most cases, though I would say Takara generally has the edge. Now, with the Unite Warriors line, a lot of people seem to be really mad that I really took that line's side over Combiner Wars in many cases, and I could kind of see what people were saying, about a lot of things, but in this case, I definitely think Takara wins in almost every case. There are a few in which I feel Hasbro did a better job at, getting the figure down, but overall, Takara owns in this case. A lot of the Adventure figures really do the best that they can with molds that aren't great. They just, give them nicer color schemes or just give them entirely new molds when it's appropriate, such as in the case of Grimlock and Optimus. But, of course, that is just my opinion. You guys, if you have different opinions or you agree with my opinion, you can drop them off in the comments section below. Which figures do you think are better or worse? Maybe give your own list, how you think things pan out, or just your overall opinions. And along with your thoughts on this topic, you can also drop off any topic suggestions for future commentary videos. It could be Takara vs. Hasbro videos such as this, maybe comparisons between two Transformer toy lines, or it could be like a Transformers 5 discussion topic, something focusing on the shows, anything like that. Drop it off in the comment section below, and if you want more videos like this, feel free to check out my channel. You can go to my videos, my playlist if you want a more organized view of everything, and you can follow me on Twitter for more regular updates, and of course, subscribe if you want more regular content such as this. And you guys can let me know if you enjoy these really long videos, because I didn't plan for it to go on this long. So would you rather me condense it down? Do you not mind it being this long? Or would you just like me to split it up into parts? Personally, I don't really see a purpose for that, but hey, I'm only one YouTuber, so maybe you guys would like something different in that area. Anyways, that is all I have to say for now. Thanks for watching, stay tuned, and have a good one, guys. I'll see you soon.